Most people imagine linguistic diversity as something that emerged slowly across millennia of migration and geographic isolation. The truth is different. What actually happened required a single plane in Mesopotamia, millions of fired bricks, and a collective ambition that defied the very architecture of heaven. This is the story you were never told about the Tower of Babel. Go back in time. Not centuries, millennia. Somewhere between 300 and 100 years before the Common Era, according to the records of Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, the whole earth had one language and one way of speaking. The whole earth. Every human being alive at that moment in history used the same words, the same structures, the same sounds to describe pain, hunger, fear, and hope. There was no translation. There was no linguistic misunderstanding. There was no barrier of the kind that today separates more than 7,000 catalogued languages across the planet. There was only one collective voice, and it decided to build. The biblical text is direct. Genesis chapter 11 verse 2 records that the descendants of Noah, migrating from the east, found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Shinar. The name sounds distant, but it corresponds to the region that today encompasses southern Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in the area that modern archaeology calls Lower Mesopotamia, an alluvial plain of clay soil, almost entirely without natural stone within a radius of 150 kilometers. No mountains nearby, no quarries, none of the basic material that every ancient civilization used to raise monuments. And that is precisely where they decided to build the most ambitious structure of antiquity. Consider the situation: a human group unified by a single language, which meant perfect coordination, no communication noise, no order lost in translation. When someone conceived a technique, it spread to everyone instantly, without filter, without distortion. The capacity for collective innovation was something humanity would never experience again at that scale. And they knew it. Genesis chapter 11 verse 6 records that God himself acknowledged it. The people are one, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And now nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Nothing impossible. The project had two declared objectives in the text. Genesis chapter 11 verse 4, to build a city and a tower whose top would reach the heavens, and to make a name for themselves so that they would not be scattered across the face of the whole earth. Notice both motivations. The first was to reach the heavens. The second was to prevent dispersal. They were deliberately defying the directive recorded in Genesis chapter 9 verse 1, where God told Noah and his sons to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Post-flood humanity had received a clear mandate to spread out. The response was to cluster on a plain and erect a monument to permanence. But the question of how they intended to do this without stone has yet to be answered. The biblical text provides the technical detail that archaeologists confirmed millennia later. Genesis chapter 11 verse 3, they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And they used brick instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. Three technical pieces of information compressed into a single verse. First, the bricks were not merely sun-dried, as was the regional standard. They were kiln-fired, which required temperatures between 800 and 900 degrees Celsius maintained for hours. Second, the structural material completely replaced stone, something only viable when the firing is uniform and quality control is rigorous. Third, natural bitumen, extracted from surface deposits common throughout Mesopotamia, functioned as a waterproofing agent and adhesive between layers. Archaeology confirms each of these elements. The ziggurats discovered in the region at Ur, Eridu, and Borsippa all use exactly this combination. Fired bricks on the outer layers, sun-dried bricks in the core, and bitumen as sealant. The ziggurat of Ur, excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934, revealed layers of bitumen applied every 6 or 7 courses of brick, creating waterproof barriers that protected the structure from rain and ground moisture. Consider the scale of production required. The ziggurat of Ur, which many scholars regard as an architectural echo of the original tower, had a rectangular base of 62.5 meters by 43 meters. Its estimated height was 30 meters. For a structure of that size, it is calculated that between 7 million and 10 million bricks were needed. Each brick measured approximately 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters by 7 centimeters and weighed between 11 and 14 kilograms. The total weight of the structure approached 46,000 metric tons. That is the equivalent weight of more than 300 fully loaded Boeing 747s stacked within an area smaller than a football field. And the ziggurat of Ur was probably smaller than the Tower of Babel. Consider the magnitude of the daily operation. To produce 7 million bricks, even with kilns running without interruption, required months of continuous work. Each kiln held between 200 and 400 bricks per firing. A complete firing cycle lasted 2 to 3 days, including heating, temperature maintenance, and cooling. This means that to supply the construction at the necessary pace, dozens of kilns had to operate simultaneously, fed by fuel that needed to be collected, transported, and stored. In Lower Mesopotamia, wood was scarce. The primary fuel was straw, dried reed, and in some cases compacted animal dung. Put it in perspective. Maintaining 850 degrees consistently using straw requires continuous feeding of the kiln, with teams rotating in shifts that could last 14 to 18 hours a day. The heat was devastating. Workers positioned less than 2 meters from the kilns faced ambient temperatures exceeding 55 degrees Celsius. Modern medicine knows that prolonged exposure to that level of heat causes severe dehydration in under 40 minutes, kidney failure within days, and second-degree burns to the respiratory tract when exposure is constant. There was no protective equipment. There were no regulated shifts. The work was continuous, and the human body paid the price. Then comes the logistical challenge that few people consider. Clay had to be extracted, transported, shaped, partially dried, and then fired. Each of those stages required separate crews. Extraction took place on the banks of rivers and canals where alluvial clay was purest. Transport was done in baskets carried on heads or shoulders, covering distances that could range from 200 meters to 2 kilometers, depending on the location of the deposit. A worker carrying between 20 and 25 kilograms of wet clay over that distance under direct sun made the round trip between 30 and 40 times per day. The cumulative weight a single worker moved in a day exceeded 800 kilograms. Consider what that does to the human body over weeks. Lumbar and cervical spinal injuries, deterioration of the knee and ankle joints, stress fractures in the bones of the feet from repetitive impact, chronic dehydration leading to kidney stones and urinary infections, archaeological records of skeletons found at Mesopotamian construction sites, analyzed by the University of Pennsylvania team in studies published between 1998 and 2012, show consistent patterns of severe osteoarthritis in individuals under 35 years of age, metatarsal stress fractures, and vertebral deformities consistent with heavy load transport beginning in adolescence. These people did not grow old. Their bodies reached collapse decades before biology would have allowed under normal conditions, and the most brutal labor had not yet begun. Raising the structure meant going up. As the tower grew, bricks had to be transported vertically, without a crane, without a compound mechanical pulley, without concrete ramps. The method documented in later ziggurats was the earthen and brick ramp that wound around the structure in an ascending spiral. That ramp consumed nearly as much material as the tower itself. To raise bricks to a height of 20 meters, the ramp had to slope gently enough for men carrying 11 kilograms per brick to ascend without immediate risk of falling. The ideal gradient was between 8 and 12 degrees, which meant that for every meter of height, the ramp extended between 5 and 7 meters horizontally. Follow the process. A man at the base receives 2 bricks, 22 kilograms against his chest. He begins the climb up the ramp, which at this point already extends 120 meters in a spiral. The surface is uneven. The wind increases with altitude. There is no parapet. One wrong step means a fall of 15-20 meters onto hardened brick and clay. He makes this trip between 12 and 20 times a day, multiplied across hundreds or thousands of simultaneous workers. The flow of people ascending and descending a ramp less than 3 meters wide created a constant bottleneck, where a single stumble generated a chain reaction. No modern engineer would replicate those conditions, but there was another cost that appears in neither bricks nor bones: the social cost. The text of Genesis indicates this was a collective project of unified humanity. There was no ethnic division yet. There was no separate nation. Everyone spoke the same language, and everyone was committed to the same obsession. This means that entire families were subordinated to the project. Children grew up in the shadow of the construction. Women likely participated in the shaping and drying stages of the bricks, work that demanded prolonged crouching and constant exposure to the sun. The family structure revolved around the tower. Witness the moment it changes. Genesis chapter 11 verses 5 through 7 records the divine intervention. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the children of men were building. And he said, "The people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they have begun to do. Now nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." The decision involved no destruction. There was no fire. There was no earthquake. There was no flood. The tower was not toppled. The instrument was surgical and absolutely precise. Language. The single element that made it possible to coordinate thousands of people in a collective project was removed instantly. Where there had been one language, there were suddenly many. Where there had been immediate comprehension, there was noise. The most powerful tool of human civilization, the capacity to transmit complex thought from one mind to another through articulated sound, was shattered. Silence, and then chaos. Examine the practical details of what happened in the instant following the confusion. A foreman shouts instructions to the kiln crew. No one understands. The ramp supervisor tries to coordinate the flow of cargo. The words come out, but find no meaning on the other side. Workers at the base look at one another, recognizing familiar faces that now emit unrecognizable sounds. Construction did not stop for lack of material. It did not stop from structural collapse. It did not stop from rebellion. It stopped because no one could tell anyone else what to do. The solution created a new and irreversible problem. Groups that understood each other naturally began to cluster together. Families sharing the same new language drew close, forming nuclei that pulled away from those they could no longer comprehend. The process of dispersal that the tower had been built to prevent became inevitable precisely because of the tower. The structure, meant to be the symbol of permanent unity, became the exact mechanism of definitive separation. Genesis chapter 11 verse 8 confirms the result. The Lord scattered them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Verse 9 completes it. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. The name Babel in Hebrew connects to the verb balal, meaning to confuse, to mix. The city that was meant to be the center of the world received the name of the confusion that emptied it. And this is only the beginning of the cascade. What modern linguistic records reveal about the current state of that fragmentation defies imagination. The Ethnologue project, run by SIL International, currently catalogues 7,168 living languages on the planet. Not dialects, distinct languages with their own grammars, exclusive vocabularies, and independent phonological structures. Papua New Guinea, an island with an area of 462,000 square kilometers, slightly larger than the state of California, alone contains 840 different languages. That means that on average, for every 550 square kilometers, roughly the area of a city the size of Louisville, there is a language not understood by its immediate neighbors. Africa has more than 2,100 catalogued languages. Asia, more than 2,300. Europe, which many imagine to be linguistically homogeneous, contains 287 languages. And each of those languages carries within it layers of dialects, regional variations, and formal registers that multiply the actual complexity of human communication by a factor no census can fully capture. Look at the scene from another angle. Had humanity remained with a single language, as the text of Genesis indicates was the original state, the transmission of knowledge would have been continuous and without loss. Every discovery, every technique, every medical or astronomical observation would have spread instantly to the entire species. The closest modern equivalent is the internet, and even so, the language barrier prevents more than 60% of digital content produced in English from being accessible to the 5 billion people who do not speak that language. Linguistic fragmentation did not separate sounds alone. It separated entire worlds of knowledge. But what linguists find when they examine the deep structure of languages reveals something that purely evolutionary theories do not explain with ease. Noam Chomsky, the most influential linguist of the 20th century, proposed in 1957 the theory of universal grammar, arguing that all human beings are born with an innate linguistic structure, a set of deep rules common to all languages, regardless of how different they appear on the surface. Every known language has a distinction between subject and predicate. Every known language uses recursion, the ability to embed clauses within clauses. Every known language differentiates nouns from actions. That common base is precisely what one would expect to find if all languages had originated from a single source that was fragmented, preserving the deep architecture intact while altering the surface of sound and grammar. The records show something no one expected. Linguistic diversification does not follow a gradual and predictable pattern. Linguist Johanna Nichols of the University of California, Berkeley, published a study in 1992 demonstrating that the rate of linguistic diversification in the Caucasus region and Southeast Asia is drastically higher than gradual models predict. Regions with moderate geographic barriers display more linguistic diversity than regions with extreme barriers. This contradicts the expectation that geographic isolation would be the primary driver of diversification. Something beyond geography separated the languages, and then comes the data that connects everything. Studies in glottochronology, the method developed by Maurice Swedish in the 1950s to estimate when two languages diverged from a common ancestor, consistently point to a temporal horizon beyond which reconstruction becomes impossible. That horizon falls between 8,000 and 10,000 years in the past. Before that point, the relationships between language families dissolve into statistical noise. It is not that languages become difficult to compare. They become incomparable. As if there were an absolute breakpoint. beyond which diversification was not gradual but catastrophic. Linguists call this the macro-family problem. There are approximately 142 recognized language families that display no demonstrable kinship with one another. 142 apparently independent origins. The Indo-European family, which includes Portuguese, English, Hindi, and Russian, has no proven connection to the Sino-Tibetan family, which includes Mandarin and Burmese. The Afro-Asiatic family, which includes Hebrew and Arabic, has no demonstrated kinship with the Niger-Congo family, which encompasses the majority of sub-Saharan languages. Each of these families appears to have emerged independently, as if springing from nothing. Separating the words was not enough. The separation struck phonology, morphology, syntax, and pragmatics simultaneously. Mandarin is a tonal language where the pitch of a sound changes the meaning of a word. Portuguese is an inflected language where verb endings carry information about tense, person, and number. Turkish is agglutinative, constructing long words by sequentially adding suffixes. Navajo uses a system of verbal classification based on the physical shape of the object being handled. The diversity is not merely lexical, it is structural, deep, architectural. Put into perspective what this meant for human history across the following millennia. Each linguistic group that dispersed from Shinar carried with it a fragment of the original technological capacity. But without the possibility of communication between groups, each fragment followed its own trajectory. Metallurgy developed independently in at least 5 different regions, with distinct techniques and chronologies separated by centuries. Agriculture arose in at least 11 independent centers around the world, each developing different crops because the knowledge of one group never reached another. Medicine is the most brutal example. While the Egyptians were developing surgical techniques documented in the Edwin Smith Papyrus around 1600 before the Common Era, populations in Northern Europe were still treating fractures with rudimentary immobilization. The knowledge existed, but it was trapped inside a linguistic bubble that no amount of goodwill could penetrate. Weeks became months, months became years, years became centuries, and each generation born within an isolated linguistic community drifted further from the others. Children were born hearing only the sounds of their mother tongue. The vocal apparatus adapted. After the age of 12, the capacity to acquire phonemes foreign to the native language decreases drastically. A native speaker of Japanese faces a genuine neurological difficulty distinguishing the sounds of R and L in English, because those two sounds do not exist as separate categories in Japanese. It is not laziness, it is not lack of intelligence. It is the neural architecture shaped by the language the brain absorbed in the first years of life. The separation became biological, and across the millennia, attempts at linguistic reunification arose repeatedly, every one of them failing at a global scale. Latin unified the Mediterranean for centuries, then fragmented into Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian when the Roman Empire collapsed. Classical Arabic unified the Islamic world, but today the dialects of Morocco and Iraq are mutually unintelligible in everyday speech. English became the lingua franca of trade and science in the 20th century, but is spoken as a native language by only 380 million people, less than 5% of the world's population. No language has ever reclaimed the unity of Shinar, and here surfaces the layer that connects Babel to the present in a way that few perceive. The New Testament records, in Acts of the Apostles chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, an event that mirrors Babel with inverted precision. On the day of Pentecost, 50 days after the resurrection, the disciples were gathered in Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit descended, and they began to speak in other languages: Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya, Romans, Cretans, and Arabs all heard the message in their own language. The text is specific. Each one heard them speaking in his own native tongue. The symmetry is exact. At Babel, one language became many, and humanity dispersed. At Pentecost, many languages were crossed simultaneously, and humanity was reconnected, not by eliminating diversity, but by transcending it. The mechanism of separation remained intact. The languages continued to differ, but the barrier was pierced. Examine the numbers at Pentecost. Acts chapter 2, verse 5. Records that there were dwelling in Jerusalem devout Jews from every nation under heaven. Verse 41 reports that on that day about 3,000 souls were baptized. 3,000 people from dozens of different linguistic groups gathered around a message that each of them heard in their own language. It is the exact reversal of Babel, where thousands of people from a single linguistic group were separated into dozens of different languages. But the quietest and longest labor was still to come. The work of biblical translation, which began with the Greek Septuagint in the 3rd century before the Common Era, when 72 scholars translated the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek in Alexandria, became the largest translation project in human history. To the present day, the complete Bible has been translated into 736 languages. The New Testament has been translated into more than 1,600. Portions of Scripture exist in more than 3,500 languages. And organizations such as Wycliffe Bible Translators and SIL International are still working on more than 1,800 active translation projects, each requiring between 10 and 25 years of work per team. 25 years for a single translation. Because translating is not substituting words. It is reconstructing meaning within a completely different mental architecture. The Pirahã language, spoken by approximately 400 people in the Brazilian Amazon, has no words for numbers, none. There is no 1, 2, or 3 in Pirahã. How do you translate 70 times 7? Christ's answer about forgiveness in Matthew chapter 18, verse 22, into a language that does not conceive of discrete quantities. That is the true depth of Babel's fragmentation. It did not separate sounds alone. It separated ways of thinking, and each way of thinking created a world. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, formulated in the first half of the 20th century by linguists Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf, proposes that the structure of a language influences the way its speakers perceive reality. The Hopi people of the American Southwest use a verbal system that does not mark past, present, and future in the same way European languages do. The Gugu Yimithir people of Australia do not use relative references like left and right. They use absolute cardinal directions. A Gugu Yimithir speaker would say, "The ant is to the north of your foot," not "the ant is to the left of your foot." The result is that these people maintain an absolute spatial orientation that speakers of English simply do not develop. Babel's fragmentation did not create communication barriers alone. It created parallel perceptual universes. Return now to the plain of Shinar, to the place where fired bricks still lie buried under meters of alluvial sediment. The archaeological site most frequently associated with the Tower of Babel is Etemenanki, the ziggurat of Babylon, documented in the Esagila tablet, a cuneiform text dated to approximately 229 before the Common Era. The tablet describes a 7-story structure with a square base of 91.5 meters per side and a height equal to its base. 91.5 meters tall, roughly the height of a 30-story building. Nebuchadnezzar II, who reigned between 605 and 562 before the Common Era, recorded in his own inscriptions that he restored the ziggurat that had fallen into ruin. He wrote, and the translation of the clay cylinders confirms, that he worked to raise the top of Etemenanke so that it would rival the heavens. The language is almost identical to that of Genesis chapter 11, rival the heavens. The memory of the original tower survived millennia in Babylonian culture, and every ruler attempted to rebuild what had been abandoned on that plain when the languages shattered. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Babylon around 460 before the Common Era and described the ziggurat in his Histories, Book 1, paragraph 181. He recorded a solid tower, one-stayed in length and width, approximately 185 meters, upon which rose a second tower, and upon that another, until 8 towers in total. The scale Herodotus describes surpasses any ziggurat excavated by archaeology. If his measurements are correct, even allowing for the exaggeration typical of ancient accounts, the structure he saw would be comparable in volume to the Great Pyramid of Giza, which contains 2,300,000 stone blocks, weighing an average of 2,500 kilograms each. Alexander the Great, upon arriving in Babylon in 331 before the Common Era, found Etemenanke already in a state of advanced deterioration. He ordered the removal of the rubble, mobilizing 10,000 soldiers for 2 months. The work of demolition and clearing generated, according to records by Strabo, a mountain of debris that was never completely removed. The tower fell, the languages remained. Today, at this very moment, approximately 40% of the world's languages are at risk of extinction. The UNESCO Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger lists more than 2,500 threatened languages. A language dies, on average, every 2 weeks. When the last speaker of a language dies, an entire system of categorizing reality disappears with them, a unique way of naming colors, kinship, emotions, and landscapes that no other language replicates exactly. The diversity born at Babel is contracting, not through a new intervention, through forgetting, and at the same time, technology attempts to artificially recreate what Babel undid. Google Translate processes more than 143 billion words per day across 133 languages. Artificial intelligence models trained simultaneously on dozens of languages attempt to locate the deep common structure that Chomsky theorized, the universal grammar that would be the echo of the original tongue. Humanity spends billions of dollars a year trying to overcome a barrier that might never have existed. Every international conference requires simultaneous interpretation. Every peace treaty depends on interpreters. Every medical manual must be adapted into dozens of languages before the knowledge saves lives on another continent. The annual cost of the global translation industry exceeds $56 billion. That is the economic price of Babel. The human price has no figure. What appeared to be definitive punishment revealed itself across the millennia as the mechanism of something no human mind on that plane could have conceived. Dispersal forced humanity to occupy the entire planet. Linguistic differences created distinct cultures, each one exploring cognitive possibilities that a single culture would never have discovered. Poetry only exists because different languages exist. The Japanese haiku, with its 17 syllables across 3 lines, is impossible in any other language without losing its essence. The samba de roda of Bahia carries linguistic rhythms that only Brazilian Portuguese produces. German philosophy explored concepts that the German language made thinkable in ways no other language permitted. The confusion generated richness. The dispersal generated discovery. The separation generated the totality of human cultural experience, and the tower was left unfinished. It remains unfinished. No technology, no algorithm, No empire and no collective ambition has ever returned to humanity the capacity it possessed on that plane when the whole earth had one language and one way of speaking. The project of reunification continues in every language classroom, in every translation app, in every bilingual child who carries two worlds inside a single brain. But the tower remains unfinished. And perhaps what those people never understood as they fired bricks and climbed ramps under the Mesopotamian sun is that the greatest monument they built was not made of clay and bitumen. It was the very diversity they tried to prevent. 7,168 languages later, each one carries in its deepest structure the mark of that morning in Shinar, when humanity discovered that there were limits to what it could build alone, but no limits to what the separation would force it to become. The tower was made of brick, the legacy is made of words, and not one of them, in any language on earth, can say it completely.